Sticking with the nature imagery to get us started. Our first reading this morning is a short poem by the brilliant poet Jane Kenyon. It's called February. February, I can speak as well. February, thinking of flowers. We're obviously past February, and flowers are starting to come out. But I think everyone except for maybe our snow removal company is hoping that we have seen the last of snow. But this is a New England poem, so there's a lot of snow in it, and it's one of my favorite poems ever about longing for new life while the world seems very bleak. So I thought we'd hear it this morning. February, thinking of flowers. Now wind torments the field, turning the white surface back on itself, back and back on itself like an animal licking a wound. Nothing but white, the air, the light, only one brown milkweed pod bobbing in the gully, smallest brown boat on the immense tide. A single green sprouting thing would restore me. Then think of the tall delphinium swaying, or the bee when it comes to the tongue of the burgundy lily. Love it. But we've got a second reading, as it turns out, or a second first reading. Does that make sense? I don't know. 1A. Okay, reading 1A. Because I had already decided on that Jane Kenyon poem when Friday morning another poem hit my inbox that also fit the bill. It's a poem that roots hope in the rhythms of the natural world, and instead of us having looked backwards to winter, this one looks forward. So now I will share with you The Plum You're Going to Eat Next Summer by Gail Brandeis. The plum you're going to eat next summer doesn't exist yet. Its potential lives inside a tree you'll never see, in an orchard you'll never see, will be touched by a certain number of water droplets before it reaches you, by certain angles of light, by a finite amount of bugs and dust motes and hands you'll never know. The plum you are going to eat next summer will gather sugar, gather mass, will harden at its center so it can soften toward your mouth. The plum you're going to eat next summer doesn't know you exist. The plum you are going to eat next summer is growing just for you. And this is our Bible reading for this morning. It comes from the letter of 1 Peter, probably not written by Peter, who'd probably been dead for 4 decades or so by the time it was written, but written in his name. It says, "Praised be the Abba God of our Savior Jesus Christ, who with great mercy gave us new birth, a birth into hope, which draws its life from the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, a birth to an imperishable inheritance incapable of fading or being defiled, which is kept in heaven for you who are guarded with God's power through faith, a birth to a salvation which stands ready to be revealed in the last days." There is cause for rejoicing here. You may, for a time, have to suffer the distress of many trials. But this is so that your faith, which is more precious than the passing splendor of gold purified by fire, may by its genuineness lead to praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ appears. Although you have never seen Jesus, you love him. And without seeing, you still believe and rejoice with inexpressible joy, touched with glory, because you are achieving faith's goal, your salvation. A couple of weeks ago, Samantha Boucher walked into a women's room at the Kansas State House in Topeka, Kansas. If that sounds like a normal, rational, reasonable thing to do when you're in a government building and have to pee, you're right. But that reasonable, rational, normal thing made Samantha Boucher a lawbreaker. 3 years ago, the Kansas state legislature passed a bill that was designed to punish trans people for existing. It said that gender identity and biological sex are the same thing and are both dependent upon the reproductive organs someone is born with. It made it illegal for people to use bathrooms that don't match the sex they were assigned at birth. The Democratic governor at the time vetoed that bill, but Kansas is so carved up that there's a Republican supermajority, and they overrode the governor's veto. This January, they felt like that law wasn't strong enough, so they passed an updated version of it. It invalidates documents like driver's licenses and birth certificates that have any kind of marking on them to designate a person's actual gender identity. And it makes those people who hold those documents pay for new copies. It also doubles down on banning trans people from using public spaces like restrooms and locker rooms that don't match the sex they were assigned at birth. And it comes with penalties. On the first offense, just a warning. The second offense, a fine for $1,000. A third offense, you will be charged with a misdemeanor. It also has a bounty hunter provision that allows anyone to complain about someone else's use of a bathroom if they feel aggrieved by it. And they can request a $1,000 payment to themselves. Because what better way to encourage people to turn on their neighbors? That sounds like a great way to build the common good in a state. The new Democratic governor, Laura Kelly, also vetoed that one, and the legislature again overrode the veto. The law took effect this past February, thinking of flowers, February, making Kansas one more state actively trying to erase trans people. So Samantha Boucher became a lawbreaker on purpose 3 times in a row. She's the founder and executive director of Trans Liberty, which is a national group. When the bill became law, they started fundraising to provide cash assistance to help trans people and their families move out of the state. They want to help, they figure they're going to help about 2,000 people move out of the state. Others who want to stay, they want to give them support to help them stay as safely as possible. And she showed up at the State House on March 31st, which was Trans Day of Visibility. By chance, she walked in as Governor Kelly was just finishing up a news conference about that bill. And Boucher thanked the governor for her support. And the governor said to her, "I'm very sorry that you and others have been put in this situation." But as soon as she entered the building, Boucher went to the Capitol Police and told them that she planned to use a bathroom that she wasn't supposed to use according to the law. She asked Lieutenant Grady Walker to follow her to the bathroom and record her walking in and walking back out 3 times, enough to trigger all 3 levels of the law, or all 3 levels of penalty. What would make you break the law? I mean, I'm pretty sure that most people in this room who drive have probably broken the speed limit, but there's a certain level of self-preservation in that, as well as not wanting to get a ticket. You know, I've been driving the speed limit and almost driven over top of, so I understand self-preservation and pragmatism. So I'm thinking something more serious at this time. Something, what would make you break a law like the one in Kansas that comes with escalating penalties? I don't know I don't know how many of us think about that regularly. Some of you know that there were 10 folks arrested outside of the ICE office in Center City on the Monday before Easter. 9 of them were clergy. One of them was Linda Noonan, and they were there unsurprisingly, right? Others were friends and acquaintances of mine. And I know some of you know this because more than one person reached out to ask if I needed bail money, which really made me feel it warmed my heart. I had been invited to take part in that action, and there was a part of me that was really drawn to it. And then there was another part of me that had already signed on to lead the interfaith vigil that was taking place in the same spot just a couple of hours later. And more importantly, I had to be on campus to teach my class that afternoon. And it just felt wrong to be possibly in custody when my students were sitting in a classroom waiting for me to show up and talk with them about world religions. Not that most of them would be that disappointed. I think, oh, prof's in jail. So, but, you know, we've all got to balance our sense of risk and our responsibilities to other people. On Good Friday, there was another group of protesters from No Ice Philly. They were blocking the garage to the ice building when we got there, trying to hold a similar action to the Monday action when we arrived for our interfaith Good Friday vigil. They paused their action so that they weren't in competition with our vigil. They stood around to support us. And then they took inspiration from our message about how the Good Friday story of state abusing power is played out every time someone is killed by ICE or Border Patrol, every time someone dies in their custody. And then after the vigil, we stayed in support of them, and they had listened to us and improvised. They changed their action, and 8 or 10 of them, lay down in the street and had people draw chalk body outlines around them, where they waited, and we prayed for them and observed until police came, spoke to each of them individually, gave them 3 warnings that they had to move, and then when they didn't, they got up and they each were arrested and taken into custody and processed. What does it mean to follow the law when the law is lawless? Or when so much around us is a vision of horror, how do we hold on to a vision of hope? Those questions are related, and I think they're questions that the scriptures wrestle with. The passage that we read today comes from a letter that was sent out to Jesus movement folks, groups, in several cities of what is modern-day Turkey. Times were not great. You might guess that just by reading how it's addressed. The letter is addressed to the exiles of the dispersion. These are people who'd been far-flung after Rome came in and destroyed the temple and people had to flee. Exiles of the dispersion. It's a letter that's meant to offer encouragement in a time of suffering, which makes it a letter for today, really. There's some stuff in the letter that we want to argue with, and that we should argue with. The author encourages readers to conduct themselves in their communities in ways that can convince the outside world that Christians are not a threat to society, but are model citizens. I mean, it's hard to argue that today when you're looking at a lot of the Christians who are doing things that are a threat to society. That's another story. But, so at the very least, we can say yes to this and a no to this. Yes to living out practices of compassion and mutual care in community and extending that to others beyond the boundaries. This is the way of Jesus. Yes, that is absolutely something we should take from this letter. But if that means just keeping your head down, if the encouragement is to say, live in such a way that no one ever takes offense, just keep your head down and hope that they leave us alone, that's not going to be enough. History has shown us again and again and again, it's never enough to just keep your head down and hope that the trouble passes. What I'm drawn to is this idea that the communities who received this letter were made up of people who were suffering because of their identity. And that this letter offered them a way to make sense of that suffering, to look at the unjust suffering that Jesus went through, but also by looking at the rest of his story. The Good Friday story and the Easter story belong together. They're part of one story that says, yes, there is unjust suffering. Yes, the state absolutely abuses its power. Yes, powerful people do terrible things to keep themselves in power. And yes, God is with you through all of that, holding out a vision of a better world that you can participate in, of a just and a generous world. Holding out the idea of the delphinium in bloom while you're still living in the dreariness of February. Holding out the promise of a tree you can't see in an orchard you can't see, getting rain and sun and labor that you will never feel, but that will still fill your mouth with the sweet juice of a plum this summer. Resisting unjust laws and abusive systems is a way of holding on to that promise. When we resist, we are effectively saying that this world isn't the only one. Another world is possible. Another way is possible. Even more than that, when we resist, we are helping that world come into being and break through. Does anybody remember the vocabulary word that Priscilla taught us last week? Proleptic. Write it down on your arms. No, I'm kidding. Which means looking ahead in expectation, treating as real what has not happened yet, tasting the plum before the tree has even bloomed. Samantha Boucher is tasting the plum. She had Lieutenant Walker follow her to the bathroom to see that she was walking in and out illegally. She had him film her doing that so there would be a record of it all 3 times. Then he took her to a private room to interrogate her. He said it was now a criminal investigation. She thanked him for his professionalism throughout the whole thing. He and his colleagues were clear about this. They said the law is a civil law. And they don't think that the Capitol Police even have the authority to impose penalties, even if they wanted to. Later that day, somebody checked in with the state's Department of Administration to see if anyone had complained about Boucher going into that bathroom, and no one had, and they would not or could not answer any questions about how they were actually going to enforce the law. Because, of course, the real purpose wasn't the law so much as it was creating an atmosphere of fear. But the upshot, on that day at least, was that Samantha Boucher broke an unjust law and nothing happened, except that she exposed the true weakness of the bullies in power. That message got out earlier this year in the state of Idaho as well. Last year, the Idaho legislature passed a bill that outlawed the pride flag on government property. But in Boise, which is the capital city, the city council got around that, at least for a time, by making the pride flag the city's official flag. But on March 31st, again, Trans Day of Visibility, the legislature passed a law saying, banning any city flag that was made a city flag after January 1st, 2023, and imposing a fine of $2,000 per day per flag for any banned flag that was being flown, and also allowing the Attorney General to file lawsuits. So on the day that became law, Boise took down their pride flag. And then they started to wrap all of their flagpoles in thick rainbow stripes that are the colors of the Progress Pride flag. All it cost them was $6,000, which would have been 3 days' worth of the fines the state was going to impose. But showing how utterly weak and stupid the law was, that was priceless. We have got to resist creatively, resolutely, joyfully, playfully. We've got to do it. We're in winter now with a deep and pitiless snow covering the heart of our nation. But hold on to the world that is possible. Imagine a delphinium or whatever colorful flower is your favorite, swaying in the breeze. Give your imagination's tongue a proleptic taste of fruit. Because y'all, one of these days, those plums are going to be sweet. And this is God's good news. Amen.